Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Saturday conversation with me, Ruth Crosland, licensed lay minister in the Avon Valley Churches Parish, which, as you know by now, I'm sure, is a collection of 7, but I think sometimes 5.5 churches on the northwest corner of the New Forest in Hampshire. And it's my very great pleasure today to welcome Michael Smith, who, as you can see, is a priest, and his parish is Winton, Moordown and Charminster, a collection of churches in Bournemouth. And Michael and I have met on a number of occasions. Most recently, I think probably was a training that we went to at the diocese. So he is our victim in the nicest possible way this morning. Welcome, Michael. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here on Zoom, and it reminds me of those however many months lots of us did things on Zoom and online. So a very familiar setting these days.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. I feel like I should have probably prepared my background a bit more like yours, but there we are. It's too late now. Michael, it'd be really helpful to have perhaps a little bit of an understanding of who and where you are, as it were, and where you've come from to this point. And then we can talk about some other little things that you've been involved in and big things that you've been involved in. So perhaps we ought to kind of start at the beginning of your journey of faith, if that would be a good place for you.
Yeah, and I guess in some respects it's quite easy. I was born and brought up in church life. Church was to my parents always sort of central to their lives. So back in the days when not an awful lot else happened on a Sunday morning, Sundays were sort of shaped around going to church. My mum is a vicar's daughter, and I'm the eldest of 4 children. Born in Norfolk, then not long after moved to Essex, and lived in Essex for sort of where I grew up in Essex. And I think sort of for a lot of my time and my informative time was being part of a large town centre church, very much in the Anglo-Catholic tradition. So very choral, large choir, very talented director of music, and then also a large core team of servers. And as a youngster, you either start off in the choir or you start off as a boat boy, and then sort of you either went, with your serving career, as it were, or your choral career. I managed to do both for some bizarre reason. What's the word? Peripatetic, or yes. or just confused, and not really sure what I wanted.
Okay, can you explain to me? I think I know, but just to be clear, and maybe some others, a boat boy.
A boat boy, yes. This is again in the days when servers were 2 a penny, and as I said, you sort of started off at the age of 6 or 7. So a boat boy was the angelic creature that would stand beside the person with the incense and the thurible, holding the incense, the boat, the brass boat full of incense, and would endeavour not to spill it and offer it to the priest at the appropriate moments to charge the thurible.
Right.
I don't think I haven't seen many churches nowadays with boat boys.
No,
yes.
No.
So it's not really a thing.
No, not really. I have to say, in my long involvement in the church, I don't think I've ever experienced a boat boy or girl, for that matter, and a thurible. So it's new for me, but I thought I knew what it was, so I thought I would just check.
Yeah.
But you were also in the choir as well.
I was, and I was in the choir until I think my voice broke. It was back. This was in the days when it was very, very male dominant at the front of church. So servers and choir and clergy. All men.
Okay, so the women were essentially dealing with the coffee, dealing with the flowers, probably dealing with some good charitable works. I'm not trying to be dismissive.
No.
Maybe Mothers Union members, but the women were kind of somewhere in the background, as it were, in terms of doing things.
Yeah. And I think sort of for me growing up, I to my sort of embarrassment now, didn't really notice that was the situation, because it was sort of the norm, you know, in whatever the late 70s, early 80s. So it was just the norm.
Right. And do you still sing?
I do. I enjoy singing. I'm not a very good sight reader, and my pitch is far from perfect in terms of I need a good accompaniment. But I enjoy sort of singing when I can.
Right. So
yes.
Interesting. I was just looking at your favourite hymn, which we're going to talk about later. But and you will know the words, I'm sure, off by heart. But there's a line that I had forgotten in your hymn, and we won't give it away just yet, Michael. But it says, "Unnumbered blessings give my spirit voice." And I thought, well, there's a bit for Michael, presumably because he's still involved in music, and music is a part of your life.
Yeah, I've always had a love for music, or from as soon as, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day, sort of as soon as I could, I had a paper round, which were, again, in the days when there were no rules around how early children got up to deliver papers, and so I earned as much as I could, and so as soon as I could, I bought a hi-fi system and records and cassettes, and I was very early into a CD player.
Oh,
so I had a large collection of CDs and records and tapes, and so music was always a part of sort of my growing up, and always around.
Right. And do you play an instrument apart from a CD player?
No. Fruitless attempts by my parents to try to get me to practice play. I can read music, and probably put out one fingered something on the piano. Mm-hmm. I pretended at one stage to play with the French horn, but that didn't go particularly well. So yeah. So no, in short, I think is the answer.
But I know, because you've told me, that music has been a huge influence on your life, and a particular kind of music and community was instrumental, excuse the pun, instrumental in your sort of late teenage years, because you took a trip to France for a particular reason. Would you like to share that?
I think I was probably a very pious teenager, and didn't think twice about in Lent and Advent going to church every day of the week for midweek communion, so some of that was on the back of a particularly tough time I had at secondary school, and I left secondary school at the age of 16. But before that, or during that year of my 16th birthday, our local youth worker had sort of approached my parents and me and said, "Look, I've got this. I'm going on this trip, and it might be right up Michael's street." And it was my first introduction to the Taizé community. So I think I was 17 when I first went. This is where I'm fuzzy. I think I might have been 16. I was 17 because it was 1986, I think, and went in the summer, and just loved the music and the worship and the community. And it was the first time I had also had the opportunity to sort of talk about life and faith with people from across the world. So I was in a discussion group with people from what was then Yugoslavia, was a communist country, and at the end of that year, there was Taizé moved out at the end of every year to have a European meeting, and that year they were having a European meeting in London. I lived in Essex at the end of the district line, and as a very naive 16-year-old, and I'm going to have to correct myself again. It was 1985 at the end. So I sort of very naively said, "Oh, we'll host 150 young people," not having a clue about sort of logistics and things like this. And I really can't remember what the logistics were, but in the end, the parish, alongside the Roman Catholics, the Methodists, and a whole host of other churches in the town, we hosted 147 people. So again, the work of God and the Holy Spirit, there was something there. I then just sort of really got immersed into Taizé as a community. Parish paid for me to go to a small meeting, a gathering in Ljubljana in what is now Slovenia. So I did that, and then I wanted to go back really for a longer time. So in 2018, not 2018, no, 1988. I went back and I ended up as a volunteer there for 18 months.
Gosh. So what is the role of a volunteer at Taizé? What kind of things did you do in that 18 months?
Fascinatingly, the community essentially sort of put all their trust in this relatively small band of volunteers, both male and female, into running sort of the public side of the site. So there were brothers who were responsible for elements of work, but then they would have a volunteer who would be responsible with them for that work. So everything from cleaning toilets and keeping the site clean, through to putting fences up, tents up, and then for sort of half of my time there, I was sacristan, so responsible for keeping the church clean and tidy and everything really in order, preparing for worship and stuff like that. So it was hard work, and certainly in some of the summer weeks, I'd be up to prepare morning prayer at sort of 5 a.m, and we'd be going to bed. We were only allowed to clear the church and clear the church up after the last brother had left, talking to people in church, and that could often be gone midnight. So it was fun. I was with a whole bunch of other young people from across the world, and so sort of you're exposed to this rather odd life in community, and everything stopped 3 times a day for prayer. And then we as a bunch of volunteers then was sort of a community within a community, really. And people came and went. It was also a funny time because nobody really talked openly about how long they might be there for, and what sort of the end goal was. So some of the boys entered into the community, and then helping the monks of the community were the Sisters of St Andrew, and some of the girls went off and became nuns with the Sisters of St Andrew.
Okay, so obviously a transformative experience for you. Did you at that time start to think, maybe there's a calling here, a vocation, or were you were you actually just thinking, well, I'm going to do another thing when I get back to the United Kingdom? What was your kind of plan did you have a plan at that point?
I'd gone out. I think I'd gone out there really thinking that my vocation might have been in the community, so to the monastic life. As all of us as volunteers had a brother who was effectively our spiritual director, who we met with every week. I had a very wise Scot, Brother Thomas, and I can still remember the time when he said, "Michael, your place is not in this community." So it was sort of, it was quite a harsh thing to hear, but probably the right thing to hear. And so I think sort of when I finished my time there at the beginning of 1990, I wasn't really sure what I was doing, and really sort of not really sure what I was doing with my life. So I returned home, as I said, at the beginning of 1990. Didn't really know what to do. Went back into church life, and somebody in the church congregation lined me up with somebody else who ran a local independent department store, and I then spent a year in the menswear department, which wasn't too far removed, for those of us of an age, wasn't too far removed from Grace Brothers.
I was just
and
having
Are You
that
Being
image in
Served?
my mind.
Totally that. It
You
was.
and Mr. Humphreys, as it were.
It was. Yeah.
Don't you, sir?
It was.
Yes.
It was totally that. But in that year, I met Nikki, who we then got engaged, and was certainly not going to survive financially on my salary working in a menswear department. She also lived in Hampshire, and so I then went back to the insurance broking company that I left to go to Teze. So they had me back, and I sort of then carried on, sort of exploring a bit, not really sure, but yeah. So I was exploring vocation and exploring at that stage ordained ministry, and we settled. We lived in Fleet, which is in the Guildford diocese, and so it sort of started that process with them. And because I went to a BAP, what was in those days, it wasn't a BAP, I think it was, I want to say an AOCM or ABAM or one of those, same thing.
Yeah.
But also in the days when one didn't receive sight of the report that was written, and went through it, and I got recommended or conditionally recommended and had to do a course for 2 years, which I duly did. But at the end of that, sort of, in some respects, a little mysteriously got non-recommended for further training. So it was a time of pain. The church sort of spat us out, and ate us up, spat us out. I have to say, pastorally, we were not treated particularly well by the Guildford diocese. And whilst I didn't ever lose my faith, sort of fell out of love with church, which I think lots of people do. We've come across people who have fallen out of love with church. We sort of trundled along, and then sort of one, I think it was an Easter, thought, well, actually, I need to do something about this, and went looking for another church, and found this lovely. It was on the way to the boys. I've got 3 boys. On the way to the boys' school. This lovely village church of St Mary's in Eversley, which was the church of Charles Kingsley of Water Babies fame, and was welcomed there and settled there, and was felt very warmly welcomed there. Lovely community, and then again it was sort of the itch that sort of didn't ever really go away about vocation returned. And I didn't talk to anyone really about it, but went back to Teze and went back to Brother Thomas. And at that time, his advice was that actually my family were my vocation, so sort of to go away and sort of focus on that. And I was mightily relieved, because that was quite an easy one. And I at that stage had a good job and career. But lo and behold, I was back knocking on Brother Thomas's door, metaphorically, 18 months later, and I say to anyone, you think a BAP is emotionally draining. Well, you want to spend a week with Brother Thomas in Teze, examining one's vocation. I was more than ready, sort of 6 or 7 days, having questions thrown at me by Brother Thomas, and being told certain things, and waking up sort of the past staff and things like this, more than adequately prepared me for a BAP. So he then, his words at the end of the week, my week there, was, you must test your vocation, and if it's a no, you must know exactly why it is a no. So off I went, and so how many years later, I then went through the process again, and started my theological training at Stets, based in Salisbury.
Yes. Well, quite a journey. And,
yes.
And obviously several knocking on the door, and pushing it open, and
absolutely
back and all of that.
Yeah.
How long have you been now then at Winton, Moordown and Charminster?
I've been here just over 4 years. What's rather lovely about actually this post and my last post, and I've only had 2 incumbencies, but at both I've been licensed on sort of at the first week of school term, and it's a really easy time to remember, the sort of when I was licensed, but actually it's I think September's a really good time because stuff starts afresh, and I think that happens sort of actually whatever stage of life a congregation members are at. People emerge from the summer holidays into something new. Lots happens in the autumn term, as we know, harvest and remembrance, and then of course the big and dreaded C.
Yes.
Here we are.
We've started thinking about it at all. Yes, we have.
Absolutely. Well, exactly that.
I used to have a friend who was a confectionist.
Right.
In a wholesale confectionist, and I remember visiting him and his wife, and Easter eggs were there at Christmas, and you'd go in September, and he said, well, we've done all the Christmas confectionery orders, because you just have to. And I remember thinking, oh, that's good planning, and now thinking, actually, that's what we need to do now, isn't it? We need to be
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's, the amazing thing here is, I'm working with a very close friend of mine. So James Sharp, who's our pioneer priest, he and I trained together at Stets, and it sort of so I was licensed here in 2018, but in 2017, the summer, he said, my vicar's left, come and be my vicar. My precise words, don't be so stupid, but there were a couple of other words in there, but those were that was my immediate reaction, because as I said, we are still very good friends, but sometimes working with one of your best friends is not always the best idea. But again, it's very strange how sort of God works all of this out, and you emerge, and here I am 4 and a bit years later, hugely privileged to be in this glorious part of the world with an amazing team, 3 soon to be 4 churches, and just feeling very, very fortunate.
I think what's lovely is that and it's funny how the church is a big thing and a small thing in lots of ways, but we also have many connections, because of course James Sharp was at St James's Church in Folkestone, where I have been for many years.
Yes.
And not recently, in your role as area dean, which we haven't talked about at all, but you are the area dean for Bournemouth.
Yes.
And you were involved in helping them develop their profile during the vacancy. And not that long ago, the joyful experience of licensing Rachel Knoll, who many people obviously in Avon Valley will know, because she was a curate amongst the parish, slightly different parish then. But Rachel now is at St James Folkestone. How lovely! All of that.
Absolutely.
So delightful.
And hugely blessed in that respect. Being, I guess in some respects wear various hats. And I mean, I joke that sort of, everybody else stepped backwards when the bishop was on the lookout for an area dean. But aside from like lots of roles, there are immense challenges being area dean, but it's a great privilege, because I've sort of got this excuse to go and have, go and see and have coffee with other clergy in the deanery and get to know them. We have a whole breadth of traditions in this deanery, and whilst a number of those traditions are very, very far from my own tradition, it's just fascinating actually talking to people and hearing about sort of their ministries, and as you said, being involved in with St James and sort of discerning their future and who might be right at St James. And I've known Rachel for some time, and it's really, really wonderful to see her land there. And I think, well, I know, Rachel is a blessing to the St James community, but also will be a blessing to the deanery and our ministry sort of as a whole in Bournemouth. So yeah, I think sort of we have some very exciting times ahead.
Excellent. I think so too.
Mm.
Now, the work of a parish priest, the work and life of a parish priest is busy enough. But most of the parish priests I know do a few things on the side as well, don't they? Not in their private life.
No, but Ruth, that's
void where there's obviously nothing else to do. So you think, well, I'll just join that organisation, and I'll join that organisation, and I'll be on that committee. And I know people have said to me in the past, parish priests have said to me in the past, it's such a joy to be able to find those other little things to do, or big things to do. Because not only do they inform my ministry and what I'm doing and in the parish, they also keep me sane sometimes, because that's something else to think about. They also help me develop my ministerial experience and all of that. So we talked about area dean, but I know you have other hats as well. Do you want to share some of those with us, Michael?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's like lots of things in church life. I think you find that the most people who are the most involved in church life are also most involved with other things as well. I'm always a bit wary about sort of saying I like to be busy, because I think actually we're all busy in varying degrees, and in some respects I don't necessarily think a priest's life is any busier than anybody else's. And and I'm really lucky, because like lots of other priests, I have complete control of my diary. So if my day is absolutely rammed, well, that's there's only one person to blame for that, and that's me. I take full responsibility. But yes, I'm so sort of locally, I'm a local vocations advisor. So I see people sort of at the beginning of their sort of discernment journey, generally toward on the discernment process of ordained ministry. Once they've sort of gone from their talking to their parish priest, and that's a joy and delight. And I see a whole host of people, and what's really, really good from my perspective is that I don't have to write any reports. So it's just actually journeying with people, which I really, really enjoy. And then one thing that's sort of taken up a good amount of time over the years is, and in fact my time has just come to an end as trustee of I would say the pressure group, Women in the Church, otherwise known as Watch. So Watch were instrumental in campaigning for the ability for women to be bishops. That grew out of an organisation called MO, for the campaigning for the ordination of women to the priesthood. So I was one of probably 12 or 14 trustees, and often the token man, which is sort of a complete role reversal in a lot of our lives. It's very, very rare that in a committee situation, men are in the minority. But it's for me, it's a subject that's very, very close to my heart, and really, really important. I'm absolutely passionate about the equality of ministry. We are so far away from any sort of equality at the moment. Winchester as a diocese sort of languishes towards the bottom of the league table of the number of stipendiary incumbent level priests who are women, at something like there are 22 or 23%. And in fact no diocese has 50%. Ely's the closest, with I think sort of just over 40%. And I think a lot of people think the job is done because we have women bishops, but again there are far more men who are bishops than women. And we also have the challenge of plenty of provision being made for those who don't and don't either recognise or support women's ministry. So it is a constant challenge, and sometimes one feels it is also a bit of a battle, because people do think that the job is done.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that it's more powerful in some ways to have men saying those things. I mean, about the equality of women. There's always this, if you're not careful in organisations, there's always these people saying, well, we've dismissed that because they have a vested interest.
Yeah.
But actually, if people like yourself, men in ministry, are standing up and saying, what about equality for women? That is so much more powerful, I think.
Yes.
So good for you.
Thank you. Thank you. And
well
I continue to obviously fly the flag. I'm not, doesn't look as if I've entirely escaped Watch's clutches. For a number of years, I've sort of helped and organised Watch's presence at Greenbelt, and we've done that in association with Inclusive Church. And I've got a very good relationship with the Inclusive Church National Coordinator, Ruth Wild, and I've offered sort of my services for Greenbelt to continue if that's what the Watch trustees would like. And yeah, Greenbelt is a great place for me. But also I thoroughly enjoy and have a sort of interest in liturgy. So where I can, I sort of bring in a feminist approach to liturgy, which is sort of does raise eyebrows, because people actually are very used to patriarchal and male language in liturgy. And so when you suddenly start talking about sort of women saints, or key women biblical figures, and there aren't any men mentioned, it sort of becomes, people raise their eyebrows. And I'm also trying to move away from male dominant language for God, which is another sort of interesting process.
Yes. Do you in your team, in your parish, have these kind of conversations together ever?
Yeah, we do, and we've the course that, or the session that we went to on inclusion, diversity and otherness, I'm keen to sort of ensure that sort of thing is very much talked about more openly, and all of us actually become educated in it. So with the liturgy, we've run a liturgy morning here, and we did that sort of as a bit of a tester to see who might be interested, and so that was well received. And actually the request after was that we did more of them, so I've got another date in the diary for another liturgy morning. And the same with the inclusion, diversity and otherness, sort of starting those conversations, and okay, not huge groups, but a dozen or 14 of us talking about what it means to be more inclusive.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it's great. And the other thing I know about your parish, it is a member of the Inclusive Church movement, isn't it? It is.
We and that was something I inherited, so that has been nothing to do with me. St John's, before the three churches were one parish, I think St John's Moordown had been a long-standing member of Inclusive Church. And so it is here, it's very, very much in the DNA, and something that is really, really important to the congregation and to the church, and quite rightly so. Our challenge is looking at every aspect of inclusion, not just whilst the inclusion of and the affirmation of the LGBTQ plus community is, of course, really, really important. It is also ensuring that we have accessible buildings for those who might be in wheelchairs and have other needs, as well as then sort of exploring us being sort of safe spaces for those who have mental health and other needs. So there's
sorry to interrupt you. I'm also it's really important to think about dementia friendly churches as well, because that's one of the things I'm passionate about. How can we include people who may have an element of dementia into our liturgy and into our churches, which are very familiar sanctuaries for them? And I think you use the word sanctuary. I've noticed it on your website, and I think that is a really helpful concept of a church being a sanctuary. Michael, I have a feeling we could talk for 3 hours, but you probably need your lunch. By this time, other people will be thinking that I think we ought to have our coffee. Why is Ruth talking so long, Michael? But I have a feeling we could, and I think we have to sort of bring things to a close. It's been really lovely and special talking to you.
Thank you.
Learning so much more about you as a person and you as a priest. And thank you for that.
My pleasure.
I also did ask you beforehand to pick a favourite hymn, and if you'd like to just in a couple of lines say what that might be, and perhaps got a why, I don't know, that would be really good, and our editors will tack it on to the end of our conversation when it goes out on the 5th of November.
Fabulous. I will. Thank you, Ruth, very much. So sort of my favorite hymn is Tell Out My Soul. I love the Magnificat. I have a theory that I think we do Mary down. I don't think Mary was the quiet, unassuming teenager called upon by God. I think she was probably quite a feisty teenager who would possibly go around her village sticking the metaphorical 2 fingers up at people and tradition and everything else, which might have been why she said yes to God's call. And Tell Out My Soul is one of these hymns that I think is best sung sort of blasted out on the organ and from the choir, and is a really sort of good rousing hymn. So that's my choice.
Lovely. I'm sure we can find a really good one, probably with a cathedral choir.
Lovely.
And as you say, an amazing organ behind it. Michael,
Brilliant.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of your day, rest of your week.
And you, thank you.
Every blessing for what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, likewise, and blessings to everyone in the Avon Valley churches.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Take care now.
Bye.
Bye.